what we have now is indictment number 4. This is getting silly. Except this Georgia indictment, which is being treated as a RICO case. This is a racketeering case. Giuliani being charged in a RICO case has incredible amounts of irony to it, if you know his history in New York. But this DA, Fani Williams, is going to try 19 defendants together. Does that mean that if she can get something on someone, that's what's going to do in Trump? What is the desperation to get Trump at this stage of the game with 4 indictments in 4 different places? But what about the other side of the coin? Exactly what is in this indictment? How is it different from the January 6th or the Alvin Bragg indictments? Well, one of the ways is that those indictments are about stretching the law to match going after the guy. In this, there's a story. Question is that story criminal? Guys, welcome to the show. Good to be with you. Brought to you by Americans for Prosperity. AmericansForProsperity.org. Economic liberty, free speech. That is what it's all about. I bring in William Jacobson, Cornell law professor and the mind behind legalinsurrection.com. They threw the kitchen sink at this mother, sir. They threw the kitchen sink at President Trump, at Giuliani, at Jenna Ellis, at the former chief of staff, Mark Meadows, at Trump's personal lawyer, John Eastman, who was trying to come up with strategies, ideas, and thoughts, no matter how outrageous you may think they were, about ways Trump can challenge what he thought was a wrongdoing in this election. Break it down for me. What do you see in this case from Georgia? What are they utilizing as their evidence here? And it just as in the big overview, how does this differ from, say, the January 6th indictment from special counsel Jack Smith?
Yeah, there's a lot of questions. I mean, the Georgia case is throwing the kitchen sink at Trump and over a dozen other people. That it's kind of a shock and awe strategy from the local district attorney in Atlanta. And it's actually very troubling. I think that of all the indictments, this is the one that smells the worst to me. This is so openly political. This is so very much trying to criminalize politics, criminalize legal practice, etc. Now, it's a almost 100-page indictment, and I haven't committed it to memory, but I have read it. And there are some discrete acts there which are really not attributable to Trump, such as allegedly impersonating a public official, things like that. Put those aside. Those could have been charged separately. But essentially what they've done is they've weaved together a story taking a lot of perfectly lawful actions and calling it a conspiracy and a racketeering offense. And it's very troubling because it's very chilling. So John Eastman had theories which I didn't accept at the time. Most people didn't accept. But you know what? That's what lawyers do. Lawyers try to come up with innovative ways to achieve the result for their client. Same with Jenna Ellis. There were attempts made to influence political actors to go along with Trump. But that's not illegal. That happens all the time. People talk to people to try to convince them. And in this case, nobody was convinced of anything. There was no end result there. So it's extremely troubling that she threw so much at so many people. It appears that it's an attempt to take down, the entire Trump movement, as opposed to what the federal charge is, which is only against Trump, relatively narrow compared to this, and really focusing on specific items and specific actions. And so it's just troubling.
What do you make of, one of the things that I thought was interesting as people have described this indictment is that certainly on January 6th, you had to take the actions of Trump and try and stretch them to reach where there is some possible illegality, or you have to take the law and try and stretch it to connect to Trump. We take a look at Alvin Bragg in New York. You had to stretch what the law was to be able to get to a felony to then be able to get Trump. And it's very Beria in that sense. You know, the leader of Stalin's secret police, show me the man and I'll show you the crime. That's what Jack Smith seems to be doing in Washington as special counsel. That seems to be what Alvin Bragg, the district attorney, seems to be doing in New York. In Georgia, they do have phone calls. They do have text messages. So in there's this argument that there is something different in this indictment, in that it's not based on a stretch, it's based on the things that actually happened. Do you have that same take?
Well, the federal indictment in DC says they have text messages and says they have emails and says they have recordings and they have conversations. So what is the difference? There's really no meaningful difference other than in Georgia there are some, like I said, discrete alleged crimes, impersonating an officer, somehow trying to gain improper access to a computer system. Whether those are proven is a different story, but so that does make Georgia difference. But the core claim of a quote unquote conspiracy to overturn the election is really the same in Georgia as it is in the DC lawsuit. So you're going to have two different jurisdictions, one state, one federal, prosecuting essentially the same crime. That is permitted because they're different jurisdictions. They're different, entities. You can have a state crime and a federal crime, and they can be prosecuted separately. But it's piling on. I mean, I think that's what it is. If Trump is proven to have unlawfully attempted to overturn the election, as opposed to lawfully. Remember, there are many things that you can do that are lawful to overturn an election. You can challenge them in court, but those court challenges are now part of this indictment. You can challenge them by talking to officials and trying to convince them that they're wrong. That's not illegal, but that's part of this indictment. There's even congressional procedures that you can use to challenge electors. So my concern here is that it's a total piling on for political purposes. Now, that is not a defense of Trump's conduct. I mean, two things can be right at the same time. One is that his conduct was indefensible after his court remedies were exhausted. And I wrote that at Legal Insurrection in mid-December of 2020, that it was time to move on towards the next election. So you can condemn his conduct, his obsession, and his false statements about the voter fraud or the voting fraud, and at the same time say they weren't necessarily criminal. And you can't loop in the legal advice he got. You can't loop in the political arguments he was making and make it a crime.
Now let's get into what some of this indictment says. This right here, the reporting was from the New York Post. The defendants, 30 unindicted co-conspirators and others known and unknown to the grand jury, constituted a criminal organization whose members and associates engaged in false statements and writings, impersonating a public officer, forgery, filing false documents, influencing witnesses, computer theft, computer trespass, computer invasion of privacy, conspiracy to defraud the state, acts involving theft and perjury. My God, when we say through the kitchen sink, Adam William Jacobson, Cornell law professor, the mind behind legalinsurrection.com, that's the kitchen sink. My point earlier about, they may actually have some things because there were phone calls, because there were text messages, is that this seems to be the Hail Mary play. Throw everything out there and hopefully grab Trump on one thing. And since you're going after all 19 at the same time under this racketeering rule in Georgia, the RICO predicate, as I know how to say it, maybe you could just grab someone somewhere and therefore take Trump down. So two things. What is this about everybody being charged together? Because Fani Williams, the DA there, has said, yes, she's trying everybody at the same time. And is it the kind of situation utilizing that RICO statement, those racketeering statutes, that if they get one, they get everybody?
Well, it's not only the 19 people or 18 people who've been charged. It's, as you say, up to 30 additional people, potentially. This reminds me very much of the John Doe investigations in Wisconsin, where they essentially froze for the better part of a year, a Democrat prosecutor, the entire conservative movement in Wisconsin, because they not only went after people, they instilled such fear throughout the conservative movement, and nobody ended up getting convicted of anything. But it was a political ploy, and that's what this smells like. Naming 18 people plus 30 potential more seems like an attempt to freeze the Republican Party. That, you don't know if you're one of those 30 people. You don't know if the person you're talking to is one of those 30 people. So that's why this smells so bad to me. This looks like an attempt to take down a political party.
Wait, whoa. I'm going to interrupt you. I never interrupt you. Go back over that again.
Sure.
You're saying that there are, I think the term utilized is unindicted co-conspirators.
Right.
And you're saying that the number out there, I don't know what the number is. You can hit it again. You don't know who it is. You don't know who it could be. So therefore, everybody's going to think that everybody's the unindicted co-conspirator. So they're not going to be able to work together, because then Fani Williams, the DA there in Fulton County, could go after them.
Yeah, and that's what happened in Wisconsin with what was called the John Doe investigations. I think it was about 3 years ago. I might be off on the number of years ago, but it wasn't that long ago, 3 to 4 years ago, where they essentially froze the entire conservative movement by subpoenaing and raiding the homes of, conservative activists under this John Doe law, which has since been revised dramatically. It was actually thrown out by the Wisconsin Supreme Court, but they froze the whole movement. And so this suggests to me, unlike some of the others, that this is an attempt to freeze the Republican Party, or at least the half of the Republican Party that supports Donald Trump. That half of the party now has to wonder if the person they're talking to and communicating with is having their communications monitored, because they're one of these unindicted co-conspirators. So it's a very, to do something this broad with this many people, to me, doesn't smack that you're trying to actually prosecute somebody. If somebody broke into a computer system, they could have been separately charged. They could have been charged 2 years ago. If somebody impersonated an officer, they could have been separately charged. I'm not excusing those crimes. All I'm saying is to wrap them into this huge bundle and to put so many people into it, and to have unindicted co-conspirators, to me, looks like they're trying to freeze the half of the Republican Party that supports Donald Trump.
Talking to William Jacobson, Cornell law professor, and the mind behind legalinsurrection.com. So in a way, I did have the basic understanding. If they can get one, they can get everybody. And if they can get a jury to say, yeah, that guy did something, therefore everybody's guilty of everything, correct?
Exactly. And that's the whole point here, that if you are in any conspiracy, and RICO is essentially at its core a conspiracy statute, that anyone who furthers the efforts of the conspiracy, even if what you did yourself was not illegal, could be held for the criminal conspiracy. And that's what they're trying to do by lumping so many people in. They're taking what for particular individuals might be very weak factual bases. They allege they're part of this criminal enterprise. Now, what they've pleaded for a criminal enterprise wouldn't survive in federal court, I don't believe, but apparently Georgia has more lenient standards when it comes to their RICO statute.
And this is where the rubber meets the road, because your breakdown, I accept. I there were some things I wasn't 100% sure of, and I think you explained it well, and I very often defer to you and your view of these things, which don't come from a political basis, even though you've got political thoughts and feelings. It comes from, here's what it says, here's what it looks like. Because this is Georgia, because this is not a federal indictment, and because this is nothing like the Alvin Bragg case in New York, can Trump avoid jail time, or is this one that puts Trump in jail? I think they're going to try and put Trump in jail from the indictment from Jack Smith, the special counsel. This in Georgia. Do you think Trump's going to go to jail for this?
Well, if he's convicted, and that we're a ways away from that. If he is convicted, as I understand Georgia law, we're all becoming experts on Georgia law very quickly, is that there are mandatory minimum sentences under the RICO statute. And that they can't be pardoned by the governor, that you'd have to go through a commission there, a pardon commission, and you have to serve a certain percentage of your time. So it does, and it can't be pardoned by the president of the United States. So, Alvin Bragg is a completely garbage indictment. I think everybody knows that. This one, if it goes through, it will have to survive the Georgia court system. And I think the US Supreme Court would take a case involving this state RICO statute, although the Supreme Court won't interpret state law. It will see whether any federal rights have been violated. And what I think is, if I had one overall take on what's happening, is how outrageous it is that local prosecutors can involve themselves in charging crimes in federal elections when you've already got the Department of Justice doing the same thing. This looks like, Georgia is trying to create a backstop, that if for some reason the federal suit against Trump fails, that Georgia will be waiting there as a second shot at him. And that is extremely troubling.
Of this, sir, there's no doubt. I did take a look at how this was set up and took a look at the idea that there was actually more data here by which one could build a case against Trump if one was so inclined, and see that as different than the special counsel's case or the Alvin Bragg case, and more similar to the indictment regarding classified documents at Mar-a-Lago. But I think for many people, this smells like and looks like the Hail Mary kind of cause. But you said something I just want to make sure I heard clearly. Did you just say the president of the United States couldn't pardon somebody if they were found guilty of a RICO violation in Georgia?
Correct. Presidential pardon power does not extend to state law crimes, to state crimes.
Okay. I think for a lot of people, their heads just exploded. I think for a lot of people,
I don't think that's controversial. I think it's not original. It's not original to me. People have been pointing this out for a while, that the presidential pardon power extends to crimes against the United States, to federal crimes. Whether because this was a federal election, a court might interpret it more broadly. I don't know. But I don't think so. And that is the whole thing that people have been saying, is that the next president, Ron DeSantis, will not be able to save Donald Trump from the Georgia jury. Could save him from the Miami jury and from the DC jury, but not the Manhattan or Fulton County or Atlanta juries. And that, again, is I want to come back to this. You have local district attorneys who are completely political people in jurisdictions that in Manhattan is approaching 100% Democrat, and in Atlanta, I think, is 70 or 75% Democrat jury pools, who are going after a Republican, or at least in Atlanta, going after a Republican candidate for the presidency for allegedly interfering with a federal election for which he has already been charged by the federal government. It's unseemly, and I think it really is tearing at the fabric of the country. I think I see this is another step in the separation of the country between red and blue.
So 2 questions. First, not being a lawyer, I may be asking it wrong, but conceptually go with me. The county DA engaging this on a state level for a federal crime, that isn't a double jeopardy conversation. Certainly he hasn't been tried once and therefore tried again, but there isn't any level of statute that prevents this from happening?
No, because they're two separate, and I'm forgetting what the term is. It's more than jurisdictions. There are two separate sovereigns, I think is the term that's used. One is the federal and one is the state. So you can be, just like we've seen in a number of criminal trials, that the feds will swoop in, investigating and possibly charging for federal crimes for the same murder or assault that someone has been either charged with or vindicated with at the state level. I mean, look at the George Floyd case, where Chauvin was charged and convicted of murder in the state. And then the feds came in and charged him with federal civil rights violations for the very same actions. So no, you can have separate charges at the state and federal level for the same crime.
While we still have like a minute, sir, and I appreciate taking the time, William Jacobson, Cornell law professor, be sure to check out legalinsurrection.com. If you were advising Trump, and I'm not saying that you are, if you were advising Trump, what's the defense? What is the way you handle these charges? What do you expect to see his lawyers doing?
Well, I assume they will file motions with the trial court contesting perhaps whether the RICO requirements have even been met here, whether there was really a criminal enterprise, whether they've alleged cohesiveness enough to do that. But it's going to be tough. He's not going to be able to get these thrown out in all likelihood, and he's going to have to go to trial. Of course, the other vice of all of these charges is they're taking place in an election year. And other than the Mar-a-Lago charges, because the Mar-a-Lago stuff took place only a year ago, every single one of these things, Alvin Bragg is 7-year-old actions. DC and Atlanta are almost 3-year-old actions. These all could have easily been brought a year ago. We would have had the trials by now. We would have known the evidence. This is political interference, not because they brought charges, but because of the timing of the charges. Or I should say, not only because they brought charges, but the timing. These were timed to interfere in the Republican primaries and interfere in the general election. They could have and should have been brought, if at all, over a year ago. And that's part of the problem here. And that's why a lot of people are so upset. And the people who are so upset are not just Trump supporters and not just Trump voters. People who support DeSantis see this as a complete manipulation. Until Alvin Bragg brought his charges in March, the Republican race was relatively close. I think it was 12 or 13 points between Trump and DeSantis. It had narrowed dramatically in the months leading up to that. Alvin Bragg brings his indictment. All of a sudden, Trump's up 35% because of a rally around effect, and he's never had to look back. So the Democrat prosecutors are handing him the Republican nomination, and they're doing it in a way which is so manipulative because these charges will then be used against him in the general election and make him likely unelectable.
We'll get into conversations about 5D chess and who this helps and who this doesn't as these things play out. William Jacobson, Cornell law professor, the mind behind legalinsurrection.com. I appreciate taking the time, and I appreciate you being with us as well. Don't forget to subscribe on Rumble. That is the place to do it, and we will catch you next time. Take care.